in our Cyprus office, our EU office, where you can enjoy living, working abroad with low tax and many benefits being confirmed into the year ahead. So let's dive straight into it and just give you a bit better view about what we're looking at today. What we're looking at today is the non-dom status for expats and how that's going to change for the UK. So when you go to the UK, you're deemed to be non-dom. When you leave the UK, you're still domiciled, but eventually you could become non-dom. How is that going to affect you as an expat living and working abroad? Let's review that and discuss that today and find out a bit more about it. But first of all, I just want to look at some of the headlines that are going on at the moment. And we're talking about a budget coming up for the autumn. So there was a big tax raising budget, Halloween budget last autumn, and it looks like this Halloween is going to be equally as bad. At the moment, we've got a situation where a government hasn't got enough money to meet its needs. Could it be in a gilt stock market crash syndrome like the Liz Truss government got in a few years ago? We will see. Everybody's holding off at the moment, but if they don't do the right thing and balance the books with tax rises or spending cuts, then everything could go pear-shaped. So it's a big time. And so what the government is trying to do is find ways to actually raise more money and raise more cash. So what are the ways that they could do that? Well, let's look at the tax creep options that the current government have got. One of them is on pension funds. They've got a lot of older people with pensions that are coming up, and they've already announced a 40% inheritance tax hike on those. So when anybody has got a pension fund, a self-invested pension fund, dies in the next 30, 40 years, they're going to be subject to an inheritance tax assessment at 40%. Now, people during their working life have been told that if you save into this fund, get tax relief on the money going in, and then you earn taxable income coming out. That has been the mandate for the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. But of course, a government can tax what it likes and make the rules to suit itself. So after that agreement over the last 30 or 40 years, everything has changed. And potentially it could go a bit further south again. At the moment, with the pension fund, you have the option of a 25% tax-free lump sum when it matures. Now, will that change? If it changes in the Halloween budget, it could change straight away. So we need to be careful on that one. If you got a tax-free option, maybe you should consider taking that if you're over 55 now. We will see. But they could limit the amount quite easily. So if instead of saying you've got £1 million fund, you can have 250,000 tax-free, they said you can have 25,000 tax-free, then the rest of the pension fund coming out is subject to income taxes up to 45% in the UK. So could tax-free lump sums be attacked? But there's also, if they want to break that long-term covenant and agreement that the government had to encourage people to save into pension funds, what about if they attack the younger generation now saving into the pension funds? So at the moment, over the last 20, 30 years, you get your highest rate of income tax relief when you put money into a pension. Will that always be the same? Well, maybe not. Think of what the successive British governments have done over the last 10 years with property rental. So residential property rentals used to be a good business to invest in. Buy-to-let mortgages were very profitable, but you used to be able to get tax relief at your highest income tax marginal rate. But now, if you've got a buy-to-let mortgage, you can only offset that against 20% tax, not 40% tax. So if you've got a property portfolio generating 40% individual tax liability, you can only offset personal mortgage tax rates against that at 20%. What happens if they do that with pension contributions as well? So instead of being able to get up to 45% tax relief, maybe they could limit it to 20%. They've already capped the amount you can put into a pension and get tax relief. Why not remove that cap or reduce it, or keep the cap in place, but reduce it to a maximum of 20% tax relief? So these are the tax creeps that could potentially come in to attack pensions uh, if you remain in the UK. Of course, your pension can relocate overseas. If you as an individual relocate overseas, you can then draw down your pension in a tax environment that is not the UK. In Cyprus, you'll pay a flat rate 5% tax on your £1 million, 2 million, £5 million pension. So you could come to Cyprus over 55, draw your pension fund, 5% tax, and be free of inheritance tax and capital gains tax and income taxes by investing that fund while you're living and working abroad. For more information and guidance on mitigating inheritance tax and income tax liabilities with your pension fund, contact us at proactpartnership.com. Um, can I just say to our listener, Space Whittle, I am doing very well indeed. Space Whittle, interesting. Thank you for joining us today. Um, Meanwhile, if you've got any other comments or questions, if you raise them up and they pop up, we'll be able to try and give you those answers during the session. Interesting scenario in France where you've got this soft left, centre left, social democratic government run by Keir Starmer's best friend, uh, Emmanuel Macron, since 2007. What has he done to the French economy? Is turned a capable, competent, getting by country into one that potentially is going to go bankrupt and going to have to claim IMF funding, as British governments have done over the last 40 years, when they've spent more money than they've got coming in, and they can't raise any more in gilts or any more in tax to pay the bills because they're spending too much. So now, after 10 years of Macron government, France is potentially going bust because they keep spending money, so they keep taxing money and spending money because the government think, because they've been elected politicians, that they've got the right to tax you as they are. They've got the right to make the law, they can do that. But if we vote people that allow themselves to tax you, then that is what you will do. Unfortunately, the bills have still got to be paid. The UK government is already at that cornerstone, having compromised themselves with COVID. They haven't got the room for manoeuvre, and maybe the UK could be following France into the bankruptcy courts in the coming years unless something changes. They could, of course, just cut spending. Governments could just stop spending money, stop giving money out. Spending money by a government doesn't help if you're going to tax it back, and if you're going to borrow money on gilts and pay interest to pay it back, it doesn't help. Stop spending and let the wealth generators in business, in the community, create the wealth going forward, and spend that wealth as a way of um, invigorating the economy and providing the resources that the country needs from profit, not from tax. Another thing that's been in the news at the moment is electronic travel authorities for the EU. Uh, hello, they're coming in all over the world. They already exist in the Middle East and America and many other countries around the world. The UK have introduced them this year. So an EU citizen travelling to the UK has to have a electronic travel authority. And now British people going to the EU do as well. If you've got a holiday home in the EU and you want to go to visit it unrestricted, then you need to get yourself a long-term residency permit. Um, this is what we do for expats who have overseas property in the EU and in Cyprus. If you want more help and guidance on getting a residency permit to freely travel to your holiday home in Cyprus or the EU, contact us at privatepartnership.com. The main topic for today that we want to look at is the changes to non-dom and what the tax implications are for expats living and working abroad in the UK or leaving the UK. When a British person leaves the UK, um, he's still domiciled. The old way before the Halloween budget was that you're domiciled by birth and you remain domiciled until it changes, but there's no definition of changes. So the good news now is we have got a definition of change, but it's not all good news because you've still got that inheritance tax tail which is going to follow you around. A British citizen going abroad can't suddenly become non-domicile. Let's look at the reverse situation first. An EU citizen or a non-UK citizen coming to the UK can be non-domiciled for the first 4 years. That means that on their foreign income and capital gains, they can avoid income tax or taxes in the UK for the first 4 years. But whereas it used to be up to 15 years, now after 4 years, the UK government considered that expat to be domiciled in the UK because they remained resident for more than 4 years legally, which is not um, uh, uh, a bad thought because the UK has got one of the lowest periods of residency before you can qualify for citizenship at 5 years. So under international law, you can get a permanent residency generally after 5 years, but a country could allow you to get a, a, a passport citizenship after that. So the UK have got permanent residency, indefinite leave to remain after 5 years, but you can go straight into citizenship as well, which gives you full citizens' rights. Um, the permanent residency gives you the equivalent citizens' right without the right to vote. So is that what's needed? The way the UK work it allows people to get citizenship after 5 years. So claiming that they domicile after 4 years coming to the UK actually makes quite sense. So if you're getting a permanent residency or a citizenship in the UK, then you're deeming yourself domicile and liable to foreign income and gains as well as income taxes and capital gains taxes on UK assets as well. So that's a big change, bringing it down from 15 to uh, uh, 5 years, 4 years for expats entering the UK. What about the other way round? Well, the other way round is just as complicated, and the inheritance tax tail goes even longer because inheritance tax is charged on UK domicile. And it's charged on, if you're UK domicile, inheritance tax of 40% is charged on your worldwide assets if you die. Now, one thing about dying is that you will die. It's a matter of when. So we can plan ahead. There's things we can do. And at Private Partnership, we help our clients do that by making gifts and protecting their family assets away from the taxman. For example, we said earlier with pensions, if you leave your money in a pension fund now, you're going to have inheritance tax when you die, or it's going to use up your allowance, and then your property and your investments are going to get inheritance tax. So we can get around that by relocating overseas as an individual, moving your pension overseas as a tax resident overseas, and paying less tax, and then protecting your capital, whether it's a property, a business, or an investment fund, pension, in a family trust or similar arrangement uh, to gift it across board and down generations without the inheritance tax liability. But the tail has got a sting. So whereas before the Halloween budget in 24, that you were still domicile even though you're abroad, and there's no specific defining mechanism for saying when you're non-domicile. Now that's all changed. We can actually come up with a formula to work out when you're domicile. However, if you've been tax resident in the UK, in any one of the last 20 years, you've potentially still got this inheritance tax tail together. So it takes a long time to shake it off, but you can shake it off. If you go back to the UK for 1 or 2 or 3 years, then the inheritance tax tail returns with you. So it's a very difficult thing to consider and something for you to have a consideration of. It's not that you can't gift, that you can't organise your affairs so that there isn't an inheritance tax assessment on your assets by the UK, but whatever your domicile, you've still got that liability. Um, Now, it, once you leave the UK, you're going to have this inheritance tax tail for anywhere between 3 and 10 years. So between 3 and 10 years. So if you've left the UK for 10 years and you die in the 11th, potentially you've got no inheritance tax tail, or you've got the minimum of 3 years um, uh, uh, to go. And it's a progressive thing. It drops down and drops down. Eventually, if you have relocated to Australia, USA, and you've been there, 20, 25 years, and you've not been a tax resident in the UK, you can now justifiably argue that you're not domiciled in the UK and not declare inheritance tax on your worldwide assets. We couldn't do that before. We'd have to ask the HMRC for their assessment of your affairs and whether they considered you domicile. And the assessment of inheritance tax domicile, the status, was only made when an inheritance tax return application was made, which for most people is after they're dead. And so there's not much of an appeals process because once you're assessed as domicile, you'd pay the inheritance tax at 40%. So now there's a clear path to us be able to judge exactly how much tax liability there is and when. But there's also a mechanism that if you at 55 relocate overseas, you could potentially get your pension fund out, free those assets with a minimal income tax liability, make gifts to protect your property, business, and pension and investments from inheritance tax liability, so it can be passed on down the generations to your family, and from across the border, rather than be subjected entirely and solely to UK income tax. As a footnote, bear in mind that even if you're non-domiciled to the UK, if you're newly domiciled to the UK, or you're just an investor in the UK, or you've left the UK and you're clearly not domiciled anymore, you've still got an inheritance tax liability on UK-based assets. So if you've got a mansion, a property, an investment, or pension fund tied up in the UK, then that's still going to be subject to inheritance tax. So if you're think about this, an expat that goes abroad and you leave your self-invested pension in the UK and you die and you've still got £2 million in that UK-based pension fund, and even if you've got nothing else in the UK, from April 27, inheritance tax liability applies on that pension fund, even though you've lived abroad for 20 years, because it's in the UK. Even if you're non-domicile, 325,000, so on 2 million, you've still got a liability of around about 600, 700,000 pounds from your pension fund to be paid out before any benefits are passed to your spouse and family. For more information on how to protect your pensions, investments, overseas property, UK property, and business from inheritance tax as a domicile or non-domicile, living and working abroad in the UK or overseas, contact us at productpartnership.com. We can offer you a free review and guidance on that. and then potentially help you in one way or another. My favourite story at the moment is that Roman Abramovich never did anything wrong. He was sanctioned when the Russians invaded the Ukraine because he's got businesses uh, in Russia. But basically, he's not really done anything wrong. And the sanctions are why his property, uh, uh, yacht, business, and investment assets tied up inside his family trust based in Cyprus is still an active, a profitable organisation and structure, just sanctioned. If the war ended today, potentially that all comes back to him. Um, as an example of that, that generally he's followed the rules, the tax rules internationally. Um, uh, American investment companies have recently bought some shares from uh, the Roman Abramovich company Ebras and bought them to trade out of the New York stock market going forward. So there's always a deal to be done, um, but there's also a way to protect your family, business, property, investments, um, and your expensive car and your expensive yacht, if that's what you want to do. Proact know-how, contact us for more information and guidance. You don't need to be worth 100 billion or 100 million to save tax and money. Inheritance tax rate on pensions, it means that lots more people qualify for that, whether they're domicile or non-domicile. So consider your future, plan ahead, and stay out of the tax creep that's likely only to get more so from the UK in the next year or two. Uh, Contact us at poetpartnership.com. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you again next time.